Okay, so back again, a bit weird. Um, so this essentially is part two. It's following on from the earlier session that was looking about that framework. And that framework probably sort of looking down at the whole entirety of the course and how it bolted together. So what I'm looking at now is just some of the mechanics of how that happens, how in that little jigsaw in the middle, how some of that comes together. And we're looking at how we can support differential learning, really so students can engage at a level they feel comfortable and then move forward, and how we can do that asynchronously because of the blended model that we use. And this is me, and it's also Joe Uncle. So Joe is one of the work-based education officers in the School of Health, Science and Wellbeing. She is attached to our course, and Joe's role is not as an academic member of staff, not as a support member of staff. Really, her job is to facilitate all of the things that are required through an apprenticeship. She facilitates progress reviews with students every 3 months, dealing with their mentors, their employers, feeding back to the academic team. It's an absolutely invaluable role, and a really important part of the team delivering the program. So these are sort of put together by Joe and I in terms of how we developed the program over the last couple of years, and mainly over the last academic year, to move things forward a little bit. So we've spoken about these. These are our students. They're all over the place, and they are training and being educated to become biomedical scientists through a model that is or was already quite difficult to deliver. Less so now, because obviously COVID has changed the way we think about blended and online and asynchronous delivery. So in a way, we went into COVID as a department a little bit ahead of the curve, because we'd already got a lot of mechanisms in place for our healthcare science students that we could rapidly adopt and amend for our on-campus students, which helped. I've mentioned that we're also restricted in a way by a whole load of professional and regulatory requirements linked to the curriculum. But we were doing okay. So we started in 17, we had our first graduates last year, but that gave us time to stop and think and reflect where we were. We knew we were making an impact. We knew that these students had come from very disparate backgrounds. They'd come from, at that time, as far north as Hull, and mainly then the Midlands and the Northwest. But they come from very different backgrounds, educationally, the whole lot. They'd come in, they were put onto a course that was in its first year, the first one in the country to deliver in the way that we delivered it. One of the first degree apprenticeships in healthcare science in the country. There were only 2 or 3 others, but they were very much traditional day release, 1 day a week learning. So we knew we could see what they were doing in their career. We could see how they adapted during COVID. We knew that they were making a real impact, and thus we might have had something to do with that. We think things must have been going okay, but also it gave us time to reflect, because we knew we could probably do it better. We knew that what we were doing was great. We knew the relationship we had with our students was great, and we knew that the relationship that they and we had with their employers was really good. But we didn't want to stop and rest there, because the program was getting more and more interest, more and more successful in terms of reputation, and we wanted to make sure that it would always be the best it could be, and we were always striving to go a little bit further. So, sort of fairly early on in COVID, we took some time to have a bit of a time out, have some reflection. Joe and I looking back through a lot of feedback from students, and again, we're very benefited by Joe having these progress reviews, and these, because of the nature of apprenticeship, very well documented reviews that we could then trawl through and pull out threads, and we could look at various recurring themes that were coming through. We were looking at common thoughts. So students may be doing 2 or 3 modules at a time, who on Blackboard all look very different. The way they were set out. You mentioned, Sarah, about 2 assessments called the same thing, but being looked at differently. Again, we would a portfolio in one module and a portfolio in another module may be very different. But I'm a student, I'm looking at this, I've seen the same word, what does that mean? where different resources were kept might be different. So there was an inconsistency across modules, which we were aware of. We knew, and as academics, you set up the module as you feel fits your purpose, but not necessarily thinking about what's going on in parallel modules that are being taught. There was a variety in content, though some of it was very interactive. But again, that was quite I suppose quite a lot of stretch in that. Some was too interactive. There were too many activities. Students felt they were being bombarded with interactive elements, videos, discussion. There were lots of activities, all the way through to some that were quite poor. To be frank, there were sort of very dry content being delivered online. There was interaction in terms of drop-in, and obviously during COVID, although we have online, we had on-campus study days during COVID, we had online days when students would all be online together at the same time, which were great, but we wanted more interaction between students. And the big push with all of this was, and again, it's a phrase you mentioned about being time poor, the students were time poor. As an apprentice, they're working full time. They have 20% of their time, their work hours, off the bench to be engaging in this. And our task is to deliver within that time, but also to pull out elements that they're doing within the workplace as part of their other 4 days a week and get them to look at the educational benefit of those. But in terms of the material that was put in front of them, the big feeling was, if I've got 2 or 3 modules that I'm working on and the content is in organized in different ways, in different styles, with a different type of voice across those, I'm spending a good hour working out what I've got to do and not doing. And that was consistent feedback, not universal, it wasn't all students, but it was the messages that were coming through with that. So we undertook an exercise of co-production, which was really, really good. The students are all very engaged, and that's quite probably because they are all generally mature learners. They're in workplace. This is part of their career journey. They're very on the ball in terms of talking to us. So module feedback is always really useful. In frequent contact they may have with module tutors is always very to the point. They're always very clear about what they need. Progress review feedback is always really helpful. It's both far-reaching, I suppose, in putting it together, but it's also very constructive. They're always suggesting improvement. So what we decided to do was, first of all, let's just survey them, the whole group. Let's almost have a blank sheet of paper and find out what's going well, what's not going well, what would you like to see, and why. I think was important. And from that, we pulled together at the student focus group across the years and asked them to look at this feedback. We wanted it to be completely transparent. We opened that feedback to them to talk through and to sort of try and pull together some of the key themes. And so they started to put together these learning and teaching principles, which I'm clearly not expecting you to read, but it was a set of documents or a set of key. We only wanted it fairly short, a single page that we could make sure all academic staff had said, this, we've worked with the students, this isn't just student grumblings, and we're responding to them. This has been an active piece of work. Joe and I have been working with the students. We've batted some back, we've taken some forward, we've made some suggestions, and this is the group of comments that they would want. And if we can try and adopt that as a standard practice, this will start to reduce maybe some of the emails asking for clarification. It might make time more efficient because you can be responding to different things. So that was already in progress. That was already en route. We'd already started to adopt that when, again, my Ofsted slide comes in. We were suddenly thrown into the fact we were now within scope of Ofsted, which is fine. We had no experience of Ofsted. We didn't know quite what that meant. But the terms that kept coming across were attendance. How do we know people are attending? Well, they're doing it online, asynchronously. We haven't got a class list. We don't tick people in as a register. That's quite difficult. How do we evidence their learning? Well, we assess them, clearly. But how do we assess them within a session? How do we have a session where if you were standing in front of a group of people, you could ask questions, you could look for nodding, you could go around, you can talk, you can interact. How can we do that when they're all accessing the material asynchronously, different times? Often maybe with a week or two lag in the material, they may be focusing on different elements of their work. Terms like fundamental British values, prevent, counter extremism training, all of the things that sort of come together with the Ofsted package. How do we actually embed these? Where are they embedded? We know we're training really high quality professionals. We know we're leaving professionals with a strong professional and moral compass of how they act. But when do we do that? How do we make sure we do that? And things like differentiation. How do we make sure that different learners are having the right stretch? If they're really good, how do we stretch them further? How do we look at bringing them through? And the last one that kept being fluttered around was lesson plans. Well, if Ofsted come, they'll want to see a lesson plan. That's great, but this is asynchronous. They're all over the country accessing this at various different times. Our student body work often 24-hour shift programs. If you're a apprenticeship biomedical scientist working in blood sciences, it makes no difference if you're at work in the core day or whether you're at nights or weekends or bank holidays or Christmas Day or Jubilees. It doesn't matter. That's your working time. So it's very difficult to say how we're going to do a lesson plan. So we sat down and we had a thought how we were going to do that. And really the key focus was why. Why are we doing it? Are we doing it because Ofsted say we have to? Or what are our priorities? And our key priority was to make sure that the learning experience for the student was the best it could be. And we were developing practitioners and professionals that would be doing the right thing for a patient. And that's my core focus. That's the core focus of the team. At the end of all of this, there's a patient who is reliant upon the outcome of our education to make a diagnosis and to do the right thing. And that's got to be the key. We wanted to make sure that was the best it could be. We also wanted to make sure that that student experience was slick. It fitted with the time that they had. We wanted to make sure we weren't overburdening them. And again, student well-being, particularly through COVID, was a real concern to us. We knew the hours they were working. We knew the stresses that they were under. We knew many of them had to sort of move into accommodation to avoid the risk for family and friends. We knew that well-being was a big issue. But also to staff, we wanted, whatever we decided to do, to have staff benefits. We didn't want to have to do things that would create us repeated additional workload. We thought we might have to make some changes as a one-off, but then we could perpetuate through, and there would be that sort of almost pump priming an investment of staff time. But we wanted it to have benefits to us, to the mentors in the departments, their individual mentors. And finally, we wanted all of that to be compliant with whatever Ofsted said. And again, that was important in reaching out to staff and having those discussions within the team, that we weren't doing this because of Ofsted. We wanted to change the programme to make it even better. And if it pleased Ofsted at the same time, happy days. And it was the framing of that was quite important, really. And all of this we had to do with whatever Blackboard would be able to provide and do. Sometimes really great, sometimes less so in terms of what we wanted and what we could achieve, but that's what we got. And we wanted a single platform. We didn't want to, again, add levels of complexity and confusion in. So there are a few things that we wanted to think about. First of all was the learning community. We wanted that, and we've mentioned that before, about that community of practice that they felt part of. How do they feel part of our programme? So we set up a homepage on Blackboard that brought together this community feel. All of the programmes, all of the modules have exactly the same look. They have exactly the same links to exactly the same content for some of these core things. So no matter where a student logs into, they've got all of this. So they'll see the staff, and that runs all the way through all of the staff that deliver on the programme. You then follow the link and it takes you to bookable slots with them. It takes them to their biogs, it takes them to their Twitter feed, wherever it might go, so they can feel part of the staff. And as you say about the initials, it shows the identity of who the staff are, and we try and develop that personality that they understand. We've also got things on there about the tea room. If you work in a hospital lab, the place where you go to interact is the tea room. you can't drink in the workplace, it's a lab. You go to the tea room. So we had a sort of online tea room, the lab social, where people could drop in, they could have it, they could have conversations. This, in a way, didn't take off as well as I thought it might. It had use, but it usually had use to signpost students to other resources. So the students set up their own Facebook groups, but this was their portal to do that. They would make communication through the course and then go off and do their own thing. Part of that, again, all the way through the course is the notice board. So if a student wants to talk about something, advertise something, do it, they can just pin it to a Padlet board. Again, this is copied across all of the modules so they can see anything. And there are guidelines for these. These are for general posts. They're not course specific. They're not assessment specific. They're not module specific. It's just, have you got anything to share? Then this is the place to go. Within that, then we also wanted to develop the support. And I talk about values, and I'll explain those in a second. So again, through every Blackboard module, there is a link to a set of resources supporting learning, looking after you as a student, and then looking after our community. And we wanted it to be a community-based thing. And this is how we wanted to develop some of the requirements of Ofsted. And the reason for that is that we felt they had more value if we think of them in the context of the course and the profession, rather than, again, ticking things that we have to do for Ofsted. Supporting your learning, this takes them to a whole set of skills sites. It takes them to resources. They can look at videos, sways, a whole variety of things, whichever they want to do and whichever they want to fit in. And within their modules, there will be prompts to go and visit this page for particular assignments. They can also book one-to-one referrals either with the module team or with a member of staff who is sort of a floating, it's a previous lecturer who is bank working for us, that they can book sessions with for individual one-to-one. Not so much the academic skills support, but more the contextualization of that skills support with a particular assessment. Looking after you focuses on health and well-being. It focuses both upon what we can offer and how we can interact with that, but also how they can access external support. So the vast majority are working for the NHS, so we link to NHS people, we bring in their resources as well. And then the final part is this looking after each other, where we talk about this in a community sense, how to look after colleagues, and not just students on the course, but colleagues in their workplace who may need sort of bystander intervention, they may need some allyship. We talk about safeguarding and prevent there in the wider context of their employment. We talk about equality and diversity inclusion. We link back to professional standards, the whole load of things there, which ticks off the safeguarding elements of Ofsted, but it contextualizes them in a way that looks more appropriate. And we did that by, again, with a focus group, actually thinking about the Ofsted and these fundamental values and what they actually mean to us as a community of academics and learners, and as a profession. And so they drew out, and staff drew out, what they thought those fundamental British values meant to them, which was important because, again, we're doing it for purpose, we're doing it for context, rather than doing it because we have to. The next section was to look at how accessible this was, looking again at the time poor element of this. So all modules start with exactly the same. There's an introduction, personalized introduction from the module leader, together with a little video that talks them through the module leader and then the course and what we're aiming to get from this. That then follows on to almost a sort of disaggregated copy of the module handbook. So everyone has exactly the same format where we explain how feedback will work. What are the assessments? They all link to individual assessment briefs, the learning outcomes and so forth. But again, in the same style and same format throughout. Similarly, the teaching material is presented in exactly the same way through each module. The tables are the same, everything's the same, and they can pull these out. So when Jo does reviews with them, she will have these not just on a module basis, but she'll have a timetable of the entire course that they're doing at that particular time. And to develop then elements of differentiation. Within each unit, within each weekly learning unit, we talk to them specifically about what we want them to get from that session. And then we differentiate that by what they must be able to do, what they should be able to do, and what they could be able to do if they wanted to stretch further. So we use this phrasing of must, should, and could. And then we sort of emphasize that through the reading we put. Again, because of the nature of the subject, there's a whole range of resources that we can get students to engage with. But when they're time poor, we want them to be focusing on the key things first, and then starting to build up their collection of additional resources that they might want to stretch, they might want to look further into. So again, we're very clear, very specific, very standardized, and we tell them what you need to be able to do this, we'd like you to be able to do that, and if you carry on reading these, it'll help you to achieve other things. And these are then topics that Jo will refer to during the progress reviews when she's asking them about the modules. Well, did you just look at the core reading? Did you look at any of the additional reading? If not, why not? What was the area? Was it because you found it hard? Was it a timing issue? And so forth. Engagement, how do we know that they're learning? Well, that's difficult because they're accessing at very different times. So we make sure that each module, each unit, each weekly unit has got some check of understanding. So once they've accessed it, it could be posting to a discussion board. It could be doing a short online test. It could be doing a whole variety of different things. It could be posting a quick reflection about that week's topic. And we can have a look at those and we can check that people are engaging. And if not, again, during progress reviews, we can find out what the barriers are to that. And every week has got an option for a discussion board questions the staff will then refer to during that next week. Attendance is difficult because it's online. So how do we know? Well, we could rely upon the Blackboard analytics, but that's not really very easy because we can tell when people we've looked. We can't particularly do a lot with those data. So we have a check review status on everything. But what we've done, in lieu of a class list, sending around a list in a room, we have an online form embedded within each week. The standard form that runs across the year using drop-down boxes, just for students to tick to say that they're there. It's their access, it's their login. They're saying that they've attended that session at the end of the material, and there's an option for them to comment if there's anything they want specifically to ask, which is good. It doesn't show engagement necessarily. It shows that they've been to that page and done it. But equally, sending a class sheet round and getting someone to sign doesn't necessarily. It does exactly the same thing in effect. What we can do though is pull data from that, and so Jo each week will send staff a spreadsheet showing both who's filled in that form and then doing a quick engagement check on Blackboard to look at the last day of access, and it will flag us up. It will flag us students who we feel need a prompt. There might be an issue developing that we can be forward warned of, and we can do some sort of intervention. And some of them will not be. So this was taken at a point when assessments had been done. So actually they'd finished on that module. We were happy. We could roll down the list. Those people who had all had 10 days since they last accessed had all submitted. Everything was fine. We just quickly roll through that list and we know that we're okay. Again, where did that lead us? So back in the end of January, we had the call that Ofsted were due in tomorrow. Panic, clearly. Not much sleep. I think I worked an 86-hour week that week to try and make sure that it was there. But when we went through the inspection, we obviously got graded 2 as an institution. But what particularly pleased us was the very first paragraph of the Ofsted report had picked up on, clearly speaking to the students and their employers and the staff on the programme. They picked up on what we were doing. They picked up on the fact we were doing it in a very unconventional way. This isn't education that Ofsted are used to. They're used to going into a college and seeing rows of people and the member of staff calling people by name and answering the questions and asking questions. But they clearly had understood it worked. And by speaking to the students and their employers, they understood it had worked as well. So That's where we are, and that's the starting point. What we've got now, obviously, because we've got this standardization in delivery across all the modules, it allows us to start thinking about how we can do things for greater impact. Because we've got a standard threshold, we know that baseline, we can start to change things and measure impact rather than having however many different modules all being delivered slightly differently. We've now got that standardization that we can start to tweak. If we were looking at maybe introducing different feedback mechanisms and so forth, we can look at the impact that a specific intervention has, rather than it just being lost in the whole mud of what else is happening. So that's me done. Any questions?